Welcome to the 2021-2022 World Language Webinar Series broadcast for today. We are focusing on the Teacher Effectiveness for Language Learning, or TEL, environment domain, and specifically the EN4. This is a part 2. Our first part 1 for this particular focus was on September 29th, but here we are today on October 20th. Our agenda for today is coming up on the screen. We're going to start with a welcome and some introductions. Then we're going to take a look at the TEL criteria we're focusing on and its sub-criteria. Specifically, EN4, as you see on the screen, says the teacher creates an environment focused on language performance and proficiency. After that, we'll look at tools for implementing EN4 with the proficiency-based North Carolina World Language Essential Standards, our state standards. Then we'll do a wrap-up and some reminders before we sign off for today. My name is Anne-Marie Gunter. I am the NCDPI World Languages Consultant. You'll hear me throughout. I have chosen not to put my webcam on today because of the pressure it creates on the Wi-Fi system. But you'll be able to see the slides throughout, and you can use your control panel to communicate as we go through the broadcast today. So let's begin with our welcome and introductions. First and foremost, I do want you to take a look at your control panel. This is a screenshot of how things may look. It will look a little different, of course, depending on if you're logging in with a computer or smart device, or maybe even your phone, as well as which browser you chose today. But in general, starting in the upper right-hand corner, you'll have options for your video layout, in this case to see the slides that we have today. You can choose a floating panel view as well if you want to change things up, or if you have a second or even third monitor. The meeting controls that are right there in the middle of the screen are important for what we're doing today. On the left-hand side, you see the little red button with a microphone icon and a slash through it. That's because everyone is on mute when we come into the broadcast, because we are recording this so that we can post it with the archives. We want to cut down on background noise when we can, and so that's how WebEx webinars are set up. The other meeting controls as we go across are important as well. Notice that you have one with participants, you have one, let's look at a little chat dialogue. Everyone should have access to their chat. And as we do activities and things today, please send your responses to everyone or all attendees in the chat, unless you have a very specific question or an individual concern that you want to share with just me. The black button with the 3 little dots, as we have come to learn, of course, has additional controls that you can take a look at. We will be doing things like polls and whatnot throughout the broadcast. And then that red button on the right-hand side with an X in it is what you click on at the end to exit the webinar. If you accidentally hit it before then, don't worry. Just come back with the same link you used to come in originally. We'll still be here. So to work with your control panel a little bit, I'm going to ask you some poll questions. If you take a look at your control panel, you should have it coming up on probably the right-hand side of your screen. And when I release this poll question, you'll see them there and you can answer it. So like any teacher, I want to know what motivates you. So what motivated you to participate in this webinar today? This is a check all that apply. Was it to access professional development just for world languages? Was it to earn a contact hour for license renewal? Was it to gather information to share? Was it to learn about implementing our state standards? Or did you want to find out more about state standards, resources, policies, and the like? I'll go ahead and open the poll, and you just need to click on the responses that match what motivated you to participate in the webinar today. It is important that we all participate. One of the ways that we earn the certificate of attendance is by actively participating throughout. All right, we're down to about 5 seconds. Go ahead and get your responses in if you have not already. All right, thank you so much. I'm going to go ahead and share the poll results with you so that you know what everyone's motivation was. And it looks like an overwhelming majority of you are definitely here today so that you can access professional development made for world languages. And that is one of the primary reasons that we offer this webinar series every year, is so that we can get world language specific professional development. Also, majority of you are here to earn 1 contact hour for license renewal. That's great. You will receive a certificate of attendance via email about 1 week or 2 after the broadcast for that. So look for that in your email. Also, looks like a number of you are here to gather information to share with others, maybe colleagues in your team or your professional learning community, in your department, your school, or district. And that's great. The archives of this broadcast will be posted, including these slides, the recording, any handouts and links that we use. And so you can always access that in whatever form you need to, Google Slides, PowerPoint, or PDF, so that you can repurpose this to share with others and do your own local presentations. And it looks like just over a third of you are here to learn about implementing our state standards from other world language teachers. That's great, because some of our activities will get you to share with each other about what you do in your classrooms and your programs. And about the same number are here to find out more about state standards, resources, policies, and so forth. And we'll definitely be talking about that too. All right, thank you so much for sharing why you're here today and what motivated you. Let's go on now to another question, because I'm always curious about this. Where are you joining us from today? And you have your option of anywhere in North Carolina. You see that we are divided into 8 regions. That's for educational purposes and representation on our State Board of Education, as well as our economic prosperity zones from a business standpoint from our state legislature. You may also be outside of North Carolina and still in the U.S., or maybe even outside of the U.S. Every now and then we have international participants on these broadcasts. So once again, I'll go ahead and open that poll, and you can indicate where you're joining us from today. All right, we've got about 20 seconds left on the poll. Please complete the poll so that we can see where you're at today. All right, I'm going to share the results. It looks like we literally have every region in North Carolina represented across the state. Some of our most populous ones are the Piedmont Triad region, the North Central region, and the Southeast region, which makes sense because that's where a lot of our larger school districts are located. We also have at least one person in the U.S. but outside of North Carolina joining us today. So welcome to one of our neighbors, our colleagues from across the country. And no one from outside of the U.S. today, but you never know. All right, thank you for that. Now I'd like to go on and welcome some others as well. And this is kind of an interesting way to do it, I think, because you may have read on our webinar description that in fact we are going to feature guest speakers, model world language teachers from across North Carolina in this webinar series this year. And by model world language teachers, I mean world language teachers who have been recognized for their skill in the classroom, their ability to connect with students, and also to build and develop new curriculum based on our state standards. So our guest speakers, and I've just put a link into the chat so you can read more about this information, are people like FLANK, the Foreign Language Association of North Carolina Teacher of the Year Award winners. There's a whole page that talks about that award and lists some of them from previous years. They could also be our North Carolina Virtual Teachers of the Year, because they also serve the whole state. Or they might be world language educators who have earned the North Carolina Global Educator Digital Badge, or GEDB. And I put a link about that to the Global Recognitions page where more information is available about the GEDB if you're interested in earning it. So they have at least one of those recognitions. And so I want to share with you briefly who they are, because they won't be joining us and presenting for this broadcast, but they will for the remaining broadcasts in this series. So I kind of want you to get to know them, see who they are. I'm looking just to see if anybody is participating today who is one of our teachers that's being featured. But let's go ahead and take a look at them in these next several slides. First up, alphabetically, my last name, of course, is Emily Burris. She earned her Global Educator Digital Badge in 2017. As you can see, she's a French teacher, and she's also gotten other accolades from the North Carolina chapter of the American Association of Teachers of French, or AATF. She's at Pisgah High School in Haywood County Schools. Kristin Campbell is another Teacher of the Year. She is a Flank Teacher of the Year and was just recognized at the Flank Conference a few weeks ago. So she's the 2021 Teacher of the Year for Flank. She's at Chapel Hill High School in Chapel Hill Carborough City Schools. She is also a French teacher like Emily. Alexa Hazelhorst is the Teacher of the Year from 2020 for North Carolina Virtual, or you may know them as NCVPS. She teaches French there, and you can see she has a couple pictures of herself working as a teacher, which is what I asked all of our guest speakers to share with us. A picture of themselves, and if they had it, a picture of them in their classroom or learning space, as well as with their students if they wanted to share that. Oh, and it looks like Madame Hazelhorst is here. So I will unmute her so that she can share additional details about her work as a French teacher with NC Virtual or as Teacher of the Year. Alexa?
Sure. So I'm Alexa Hazelhorst, and I have been with North Carolina Virtual for a long time for North Carolina Virtual's history. I've been with them since 2011, and I was the Teacher of the Year for 2020, which was interesting timing because I got to spend a lot of time helping with the digital transition and helping teachers in schools as they were transitioning to what do we do with teaching online for COVID. But I have been an online teacher for a long time. I've taught public, private, charter schools in French and Spanish, but for the past 10 years, I've just been online with North Carolina Virtual doing French. And so that bottom picture is me working from Nice right before COVID. So the best part about my job is that I can do it from anywhere, so I do it from anywhere.
Very good. Thank you so much for joining us today and sharing with us a little bit more about your perspective of being a working teacher, especially during COVID, and earning the Teacher of the Year accolades. All right, next up is Jeff Pajot. He was the Teacher of the Year with Flank in 2013. You can see that he actually does double duty. He works for Nash County Public Schools as an International Baccalaureate or IB Diploma Program Coordinator, as well as for NC Virtual teaching all levels of French. And so he keeps quite busy in his roles with both. We do have a number of teachers throughout North Carolina who work somewhere in an in-person or face-to-face school setting, as well as online. Next up is Rosalind Rhodes, or Rose as she's often called. She was Flank's Teacher of the Year in 2015, and she's at Carmel Middle School in Charlotte-Mecklenburg Schools. So she's one of our middle school teachers. She teaches a variety of Spanish courses, and you can see this shot of her is very recent from her classroom because she's masked up. Next up is Consuelo Schwartz. She earned her Global Educator Digital Badge in 2020, so during the pandemic, and she's in Pitt County schools at their early college high schools, teaching a variety of levels of Spanish. Carmen Scoggins is next. She was the Teacher of the Year for Flank in 2007. She's at Watauga Schools in Watauga County. She also teaches at Appalachian State University as the methodology instructor there. So she's been a lot of places. As you can see, some of the screenshots that you see here are from her time being at ACTFL as well, because she works nationally with professional development and communicating about best practices for world language education. Next up is Thomas Soth. He was the Teacher of the Year for Flank in 2013. He is a Spanish teacher at Chapel Hill High School in Chapel Hill, Carbo City Schools. This is a shot of him, I think, out on an excursion that all Spanish teachers would probably enjoy. And he also serves in leadership roles with Flank as well as SCOLT and other organizations. Next, we have Bonnie Wong. She was the Teacher of the Year from Flank in 2019. She's a Chinese teacher, actually at the Upper School in Durham Academy, which is a private school or independent school. You can see she teaches a wide variety of Chinese courses for her students and is very actively involved. She sent us a couple of screenshots of not only of her in the classroom teaching calligraphy, but also her student performances. Next up is Lisa Worthington Gross. She was the Teacher of the Year for Flank in 2018. She's at Northwest Guilford High School teaching German as part of Guilford County Schools. And you can see that she had several pictures that involved travel as well as activities with her students in the classroom to share with us today. She is not here right now because she also has a schedule that means that her last period of classes ends a little after we start these broadcasts. So when she joins us, she'll be joining us for the second half of our broadcast. All right, well, those are our guest speakers for this year. I hope you saw some people you recognize. I also see a comment in the chat, thank you Alexa, that Lisa Worthington Gross, that we just saw as a German teacher, indeed is multilingual and teaches French as well with NC Virtual or NC VPS. Thank you for that note. I will add that to her slide. All right, well, those, like I said, are going to be our guest presenters. I've invited them to share with us in the future broadcasts about how they implement these TEL criteria in their classroom and what evidence they have for that, just so we can all hear from practicing teachers who are in the classroom every day and get them to talk about what it is they do to make sure they're implementing the standards effectively and using this TEL criteria and the sub-criteria as a way to reflect on their practice and improve their practice over time. So let's go ahead and get started with our work today. Like I said, I want to start with an overview of our TEL criteria and the sub-criteria. If you were with us during part 1 for this, you probably saw this slide, and it just makes the point that our TEL criteria of EN4, which we're focusing on, and we did focus on in last year's webinar series as well, supports the North Carolina World Language Essential Standards, or WLES, our state standards. Specifically, when we talk about the teacher creating an environment focused on language performance and proficiency, we're looking at our proficiency outcomes and proficiency-based instruction that we're implementing in our standards. The screenshot you see is from our administrator guides, and it shows our standards as they are. So notice that we have 4 standards, specifically interpersonal communication, interpretive communication, presentational communication, and culture. And those are woven with the 3 strands that we focus on in our standards: connections to language and literacy, connections to other disciplines, and communities. We call that the weave graphic on the right to show how all of our standards weave together. And as I said, it's in the administrator guide so that when we're educating others, like our principals or colleagues or whoever, about our state standards, we can help them understand how our standards and our strands work together to make sure that we're implementing and getting our students to practice all the skills and the language that they're learning. And when we talk about an environment focused on language performance and proficiency, we're specifically looking at those actual proficiency guidelines and how each proficiency level has a description of what students can do with language and with that communication skill. So that's something we want to emphasize in the way we teach languages today. So to get us started, I want to make sure you all have a copy of the TEL environment domain criteria. Obviously, we're just focusing on criteria 4, or EN4, but it's important that you have your own copy. So what I'm doing is putting that in the chat right now. And if you download these slides, for example, you'll see that these are in the notes too. But I want you to download a copy for yourself and skim the 6-lettered sub-criteria for this session's focus. You can download it from the chat box as a PDF Google link. You can go over to our World Language Webinar Series webpage and get it from there. They're always linked up for the different broadcasts. Or you can go right to the TEL Framework webpage, which is a national group that puts out the TEL Framework, and get it from there. Notice we're focusing on the TEL Environment Domain Criteria from 2019. If you're familiar with the TEL project as a national initiative, you're probably aware that they started in 2014, and so their original materials were published in that year, and they've made updates and changes over time, so we're using the most recent materials from 2019. I'll give you a moment to go ahead and download a copy for yourself so that you have it in front of you, and to skim the 6-lettered sub-criteria that go with EN4. All right, I hope you've had a chance to download the handout and have that in front of you in whatever way works best for you today. So for our EN4, the sub-criteria are, as I said, there are 6 of them. The first one looks at the teacher conveying the message that all students can learn a language. Of course, that's one of the main tenets of our state standards. It's part of the philosophy that's on page 1 of our standards document. For B, we have the teacher displays and refers to information about performance and proficiency targets. So I want you to think about that for a minute. What is it that you have as a teacher or an administrator that displays and refers to information about our performance and proficiency targets? C, focus on the teacher ensuring there's a space where the daily learning targets and the sequence of learning activities are always posted. So think about where in your classroom or your virtual space, if you're working with students that way, you have your daily learning targets and the sequence of activities posted for everyone to see. D looks at the teacher creating an environment that supports student use of the target language. Of course, we know that a best practice is to use the target language that students are learning 90% of the time or more. But that not only includes the teacher, but it includes the students as well. So think about what you're doing as a teacher to encourage your students to use the target language 90% of the time or more. E is the teacher establishing an environment that facilitates student-to-student communication. And this gets right to the heart of, for example, our interpersonal communication standard, number 1, as well as other things, other activities and things where the students might use the language together. And again, be using the target language, but this time with each other. And finally, F, the teacher displays current samples of student work and accompanying rubrics. So again, I want you to think about how you do that as a teacher. You know, do you post things on bulletin boards or on your classroom space in some way, whether that's in a physical space or an online space, or perhaps both? Do you also make sure that the rubrics that go with them that tell what the students were trying to accomplish is available with it? It's an interesting question when we think about certainly space and sharing student work. So now that you've seen our EN4 sub-criteria, I want you to think about your teaching and how students learn. And consider for yourself for a moment, which of the sub-criteria are professional strengths for you? You can choose up to 3, because you might have more than one. But I want you to really look those over and think about which are the ones that are professional strengths for you when it comes to teaching and making sure your students are learning. I'll go ahead and start the poll so you can add your answers. We've got about 20 seconds left for our poll. Be sure and get your answers in. Remember, you can choose up to 3. All right, thank you for responding. I'll go ahead and show you the results. So we take a look and we kind of see where everyone's at. The main strengths seem to be coming from A, about the teacher conveying the message that all students can learn a language, always a very positive and proactive message. As well as D, the teacher creates an environment that supports student use of the target language. Followed by C, teacher ensures there's a space where the daily learning targets and the sequence of learning activities are always posted. And E, the teacher establishes an environment that facilitates student-to-student communication. We also have people who have strengths with B as well as F. Great, thank you for sharing. Now I'm going to go ahead and leave those up for us to see as we need to when we go through these next activities. But before we go on the activities, I did want to remind you that if you participated in part 1, you've probably already seen quite a bit of the information we did about exploring EN4 and reflecting individually on how it looks in your classroom and teaching. If you would still like to do that webinar and you didn't participate the first time, please feel free to go to our archives for part 1 of EN4. I just put the link in the chat in case you want a direct link. If you want to continue to do that and really think about it for yourself individually in the classroom, by all means, part 1 is the way you should go. The materials are available and can be completed asynchronously until next Wednesday, October 27th. Just like in a live broadcast, you can earn a certificate. This one is of completion and it's for 1 contact hour or 0.1 CEUs for license renewal. And as always, districts and charter schools have to approve that. But that's an option for you if you didn't participate with us on September 29th. For today, though, we're going to look at EN4 a bit differently than we did in part 1. For part 2, we're really going to focus on the tools for implementing EN4 with our North Carolina World Language Essential Standards, or WLES, because there are a number of tools you can use in the classroom, particularly to talk about proficiency and performance. And I want to make sure you're aware of them, but I also want to hear from you about how you're using them in the classroom with your students or how you're using them professionally as a teacher. So let's take a look at some of our tools for EN4 subcriteria. And I've just summed this up for the purposes of the webinar time that we have today. When we think about subcriteria A, about the teacher conveying a message that all students can learn a language, there are some things specifically in the administrator guides that might be helpful. Now we saw the weave graphic that kind of explains our standards from the administrator guides before, but the administrator guides are each 4 pages long. So there's a lot of material there that could help you as a teacher convey the message that all students can learn a language. For B, about the teacher displaying and referring to information about performance and proficiency targets, we have our K12 Bridging Documents. These are relatively new tools to the standards. They were not something we had originally when we started implementing our state standards in 2012, but it's something that grew into a need. And in fact, we published as part of the response to the pandemic when we started school last year in the fall of 2020. So this K12 bridging documents have grown out of a need to be more clear about our performance and proficiency targets over time. And so we have them as tools for you to use now, almost as posters if you would like. We don't have a tool we're going to talk about specifically today for subcriteria C, but I'm sure you could think of many. For D, we are going to talk about the clarifying objectives by course, or what we call COCOS documents for curriculum writing, because these are critical to teachers creating an environment that supports student use of the target language. They are materials that can help you build a standards-based curriculum, and many teachers have done that. And so we continue to share those and ask for teachers' feedback on how they're using them and what makes them effective in developing curriculum. We also have our criteria ENF, as you know, But because of the length of our webinar, only 1 hour together, we chose to focus on these 3 tools that would help us with the EN4 subcriteria. So let's get started. The administrator guides. The administrator guides are all pictured on the screen. There are 3 of them, as you can see. I will go ahead and put a link to their page on the World Languages Google site in the chat. And then I will jump over there and we can take a look at what this is. When we think about conveying a message about world language instruction and proficiency and performance, one of the things we have to think about is educating others about that, particularly our administrators. For example, principals who might come in to do classroom observations and annual evaluations with teachers, pretty common. But as well as other colleagues, for example, in education, even parents or other stakeholders that have children in our world language classrooms. So our administrator guides were designed to be look for documents. What should someone see if they walk into your classroom? And what does that mean for our world language essential standards? Because most of the adults we work around, so again, our principals, our parents, our other colleagues, probably learned language before we had proficiency-based standards and might have even been learning language before we were looking at commutative practices in our world language classrooms. So the administrator guides are designed to help with that. They have, as it says here, some basic information about each program. Then they have that weave graphic that is an overview of our standards. To the right of that, they have the actual proficiency scale to talk about our different levels of proficiency that we use nationwide, so certainly here in North Carolina. Then they have a section on things like research and testing results. So what's the impact of a student learning a world language, not just the fact of learning it itself, but also what's the academic impact on things like test results. We notice that students, when they're learning a language, have better outcomes academically across the board. And so here's some evidence for that. There are a number of pages. I'm going to click on the Modern Languages Administrator Guide to take a closer look. And I'm going to put a link in the chat where you can download each one of these individually. If you go out to the page, of course, you can just click on whichever one you want, like I did, and it will download and it will present like this from the Google Drive. But here's the links to all of them. Our classical languages one focuses on programs like Latin and Ancient Greek. Our Dual and Heritage Languages Administrator Guide focuses on things like heritage language programs as well as dual language immersion. And then the Modern Languages one that we've got up on the screen looks at languages when they're taught as a separate subject. So once again, you've seen page 1, so I'll scroll past that. But then on page 2 of our guides, there's a space that talks about in the classroom. So in this case, in the modern language classroom. And again, what someone should see when they walk into our classrooms, what we mean by proficiency-based instruction, what they should see or hear if students are speaking or signing, but also what else is going on and how teachers write curriculum and focus on that. There's also a section on appropriate expectations, and that gets into the idea of proficiency and what that means, how that applies to all skill areas, whether it's one of the communication modes like interpretive communication, interpersonal communication, or presentational communication, or culture. We still need to use the target language when students are learning about culture and expressing themselves, whether that's in speaking or signing or writing. And so that appropriate expectations section is in each administrator guide to talk about that. Then what follows is a chart showing our proficiency outcomes for a course or a series of courses in that particular program. Here you see high school credit courses for alphabetic languages like Spanish or Arabic or German. And so it kind of shows over time the level of proficiency students should be able to demonstrate once they have completed a course, in this case a level 1 through 8 course at the high school. The last 2 pages of each administrator guide are the same. They connect to our North Carolina Educator Evaluation System, or NESA standards, and they specifically tie into the TEL project observation because they help a principal or whoever's doing an observation look for not only what they need to with standards 1 through 5 of our NESA system, but in fact tie into best practices for world language so that someone could give good feedback to a world language teacher about how they could improve their practice. And so that's available on pages 3 and 4 of all of the administrator guides. All right, so I'll jump back to our slide because again, this is a tool that we can use to think about the EN4A, how a teacher conveys the message that all students can learn a language. So now that you've seen the administrator guide, and I hope downloaded one that's useful to you that you can use in your specific program, I want us to have what I call a ponder poll. So when I set this to go, we'll have longer to respond because I want you to think about the question you see here. When you skim one of the administrator guides, just look at it quickly, which section or sections would be most helpful as tools for EN4A? So you've got the different sections sort of as you go through pages 1 through 4, and I want you to think about which of those is most helpful as a tool for the teacher conveying the message that all students can learn a language. I'll go ahead and run that poll, and you'll have 2 minutes to put your response in. Remember, you can choose up to 3 of these when you think about these sections. Now, I said this was a ponder poll, so we've got more time to think about this, and I've just revealed what everyone had to say about which of these sections would be most helpful as tools for EN4A. And so if you notice, if you go through that, the section that gets sort of the most votes, if you will, is the information about our World Language Essential Standards Weave graphic, kind of overviewing our standards. But the section on appropriate expectations also gets a lot of votes, as does the in the classroom section, and some of the other areas as well. So in addition to having more time to ponder this, I also want to ask you, why do you think so? So you answered A through I, some combination thereof. So why do you think that particular section would be most helpful as a tool for EN4A? Type the letter of one of your choices and your reasons in the chat box. So if you picked the World Language Essential Standards Weave, you could simply put B and then your reasons for that, and then put that in the chat box to everyone so that we can see how you're thinking about that and we can share that with each other. Let's go ahead and do that. All right, I'm looking for responses about why you picked the sections you did as being most helpful. All right, and they're starting to come in. Alexa mentioned G, the appropriate expectations section, because she thinks that administrators need to know what are the appropriate expectations to have. What do teachers expect? And what is in the standards, and so what is expected by the curriculum? All right, you see other people saying. They also like G, those clear expectations. Some of them like the description of the K-12 program, that what's in A sort of right at the front and center when you open that, because A helps them, administrators know what the program entails. Some people like H, the exit proficiency expectations chart, because it sets goals students need to achieve by the end of the course. Many people like G, the appropriate expectations, again, because it's a good teacher support, because those expectations can be overwhelming. Also, the expectations chart gives you a good working knowledge of what is expected of learners. And we see others coming in too. Some people like F, the in the language classroom section, because it's a clear picture of what should be going on. And we've got all kinds of answers. So please take a moment and read through those and see what others are saying about how to use this tool and what they think is a good section to be using to convey the message that all students can learn a language. We have a couple people pointing out with those appropriate expectations section that sometimes expectations can be unreasonably high at the start, and when they can't be reached, it can be frustrating to students. We've often heard students say, well, they'll be fluent, whatever fluent means to them, by the end of a level 1 or level 2 course, and we know it takes longer to build the kind of proficiency that you can use like that. Also, the appropriate expectations section is good for teacher support and for the non-language trained people to know exactly what to look for in a classroom. And again, if you have a principal or others coming in to evaluate you, which all teachers do, of course, it's good for them to understand what it is they should be looking for. All right, and several people are commenting too that some of these sections provide guidance about the interconnectedness of strands and standards, or guidance in terms of programming. What's a good sequence for students? So lots of options here. All right, thank you so much. Let's go on to another tool, the K12 Bridging Documents. These are a tool that could help with subcriteria B about a teacher displaying and referring to information about performance and proficiency targets. These are actually on our standards page on the website. Give me just a moment. I'm flying solo here, so I'm trying to copy and paste as we go. But these K12 Bridging Documents, as I explained before, were developed starting last year and distributed. They're on our standards page under curriculum writing resources. And so you see there on the left that they're one of the last things that are linked. You also see on the screen pictures of them. Notice that they're different links. Some are just one pager, a front and a back, like the K12 Classical Languages Bridging Document. And some are multiple pages because of the things that they have to convey and some of the other details that are part of those programs. So what I want you to do is go over to our curriculum writing resources on the standards page. And find those bridging documents. So I'm going to go ahead and put that there. If you want to download, if you want to download them individually, you can do that just like we did with the administrator guides. They're available to you. So if we jump over there to that page, you'll see that there's a number of things actually on the page that are available as standards tools. Our whole standards page has everything you need for our state standards, of course. So if you scroll down on the right-hand side, we just talked about the administrator guide. So under program resources, that's where they're linked. But also on the left-hand side, we have these curriculum writing resources. And like I said, we have our K12 Bridging Documents. I'm going to click on the DLI one, since I chose modern languages for the administrator guides, just to take a look and see what that is. I hope you're downloading one that you can use too. Notice that these documents look at our expectations. That question up above is, what do we expect students to be able to do in this case, the K12 dual language immersion programs? So there's a lot of things here. Some are visual and some are more descriptive in nature. On the left-hand side, we have a series of courses that are part of the K12 sequence for this program, in this case DLI, so DLI literacy courses. And we also have icons that represent the level of proficiency. A parrot is for the novice level of proficiency, either low, mid, or high. A survivor is for the intermediate levels of proficiency, either low, mid, or high. And then as we get further up, we see that there's some exchange between the two. Those of you familiar with heritage speaker courses or heritage language courses, used to be called native speaker courses. Those are part of the DLI sequence, whether they're actually part of a dual language immersion program or if it's in fact a place where students who speak the language at home then can get access and learn literacy skills or polish literacy skills in their home or heritage language. And then as that goes on, there's some guidance about that. And then you see on the following pages the other icons, including our Global Languages Endorsement, or GLE icon for our State Seal of Biliteracy at level 4. Because in earning that, students have to complete a level 4 course or higher with a certain GPA to complete their world language requirement for our State Seal of Biliteracy. Notice also on each page up at the top and running across, we have representation of our state standards. Here they're done a little bit differently than we saw in the Weave, of course, but they're linked to the proficiency or the communication modes icons that ACTFL uses nationally. So we start out with interpretive communication, which is our standard number 2. We have one for interpersonal communication, which is standard number 1, and then presentational communication, which is standard number 3. The last two that are in green instead of purple, like those, look at a standard number 4 about culture. Notice that after each icon for the standard, there's a brief description of what that is or how that would look in the classroom. And then what follows that, where you cross-reference the particular standard and the level of course, is a description, a can-do statement that talks about what students can do. Sometimes those I can statements are used for reflection in the classroom. Sometimes they're used to build curriculum and think about what your students will be able to say they can do after a certain level of course, just like our proficiency expectations charts help us understand. And so there's a lot of information there on this chart and on these K12 bridging documents to show the K12 sequence and how language skills grow across the different communication modes and or standards. At the end, on the last page of every K12 bridging document, are some additional details about those particular that particular sequence in that particular language program, references to where you can find more information about all of the K12 courses that go with that program, and then links to our clarifying objectives by course outcomes, or COCO's pages, that we're going to look at here in a bit. So a lot of information in one place. So again, our K12 bridging documents are there for you to use as a tool. Many teachers display them and refer to them about performance and proficiency targets for the courses that they're teaching, whether that's displaying them for themselves or their team, or for their students and other stakeholders that come into their classrooms. They can be used a lot of ways. So once again, I'm going to do a ponder poll. I'm going to ask you, when you scan a K12 bridging document, you can pick any one you want, which aspects are most helpful as tools for EN4B for the teacher displaying and referring to information about performance and proficiency targets? So you see all the things we looked at, that K12 overview of courses for the program on the left-hand side, the icons that went with them for the proficiency levels, the GLE or State Seal of Biliteracy logo on level 4, the visuals for our state standards or our national standards across the top, the description of each standard, the I can statements for each standard and course, the details on the last page, or the links to the COCO pages. So once again, I will open that poll up. This is a ponder poll, so you can choose up to 3 here. but you can also be indicating which of these are most helpful. And just like last time, we will also have a chance for you to share in the chat box if you want about why you think so, why you chose a particular aspect of the bridging document and why you think that is most helpful. All right, I see people also starting to add their why, that they chose a particular aspect of our bridging documents as most useful. So thank you for that. Please go ahead and add those as we go. All right, you should see the poll results. The overwhelming majority of you indicated that the most helpful part of the K12 bridging documents for you are the I can statements, followed closely by the description of each standard. And so you're seeing appear in the chat box now why people like those I can statements so well, which was aspect F of there. Take a brief look at that, see what people are sharing. Some like that the I can statements are very specific, which lets the students know exactly what's expected of them. Some like them because they're practical, useful guidelines for students, and it really helps them see what they should be able to do with the language at a given level or area of skill. A lot of people are mentioning the expectations are clearly stated in the I can statements, and they're very specific, which helps students, but also helps others who are looking to have expectations about classrooms. So parents, administrators, and others who are looking at language growth as well and trying to gauge where their student is at and how quickly those skills develop. All right. I'm cognizant of our time, so I'm going to go ahead and leave this information up, and you can continue to share. Please do. That's always very helpful. But we'll go ahead and go to our last tool, which is our clarifying objectives by course. When we talk about student creating an environment that supports student use of the target language, all of our standards are important. And of course, you want a standards-based curriculum that you write that also covers all of our standards and makes sure that they're balanced across time. So just like before, on the standards page on the World Languages School site, under the curriculum writing resources, we have these clarifying objectives by course. And these are something that has grown over time. We started these probably in about 2014 or 2015, and now there's a wide array of them. For example, on the clarifying objectives by course page that you go to from the standards page, if you link from there directly, you'll be able to see that there's a page, a K12 page with COCO documents for literally every single language that we have course codes for. And some people may not even be aware of the fact that we have course codes for less commonly taught languages, like you see here. So for example, Hebrew and Italian and Russian and Tamil and Telugu and Urdu. Those are all languages being taught in North Carolina. They're not huge programs yet, but they're growing over time. And so what I want you to do is pick the language that you teach or that maybe you have in your school if you're an administrator. I'm going to click over to that curriculum clarifying objectives by course page so that we can see it. Let me get that up on here. There we go. So when I click on the clarifying objectives by course page link that you see on the screen, I go to the page we just saw screenshots on, and I scroll to the bottom and I can click on literally any language I teach and find all the materials available for you that are there. I'm going to click on Spanish because Spanish is the most developed page because it has the greatest number of courses and variety. So there's just an overview of the fact that our COCO's documents are available for everyone. Those documents have the clarifying objectives for the specific proficiency outcomes for every standard for that particular course. So there's a section for elementary school courses, and notice on every single page, so no matter which page you go on, you'll see these same icons and information. The elementary school courses have a brief explanation from the standards. They also have details about that particular part of the K12 sequence and the course codes you would use for teaching those courses in that particular language. After the elementary school course codes, you see the middle school courses. And again, there's an explanation from the standards. There's a series of courses and what their course codes are for that particular language that students are learning. The icons you're seeing, by the way, on the left-hand side about a future-ready graduate are what we call the NICI graphics. NICI is our future-ready North Carolina student at the elementary, middle school, and eventually high school level. As we scroll down though, if a language has a DLI program somewhere in the state, and there are 8 different languages to do, there'll also be the K8 DLI literacy courses that you saw as part of the DLI bridging document. And again, you have those courses, what they are, and their course codes. And here we have a graduate NICI and the high school courses that are available. Notice that for these courses, again, you have an explanation from the standards. You also have the course codes as they're taught, as well as other course codes that are aligned to them. So for example, there are a number of high schools now that are linked to an early college program at a nearby community college. And so whether a student takes, let's say, their Spanish courses in their high school or at their community college campus, doesn't matter, because it shows you here on this list how those courses align. So like a Spanish 1 and Level 1 course at high school is equivalent to a 111 course at the community college. So lots of details here. Now the thing about this, we do have the Heritage Language Programs courses as well, is that again, these COCO documents are there for you. They're Word documents. If you open one up, you are going to see that you have everything you need for that particular course. I opened up level 1, so this would count for, as it says, Arabic 1, Cherokee 1, French 1, Spanish 1, all of those courses, right? They all use the same proficiency outcomes, thus they use the same clarifying objectives for each standard in our World Language Essential Standards. So this is what you see on those documents. They are simple Word documents, so you can download them and start adding into them as you need to, saving your own copy and going as you can. With others, if you're working with them to write a curriculum or maybe a pacing guide with these, or on your own, because these are Word documents, and again, they pull information from our standards that is most relevant to this particular course and its outcomes. All right. So that's what our COCO's documents are. They are full of information, and I post them there and encourage you to explore them more as you can. I am cognizant of our time, so if we had more time, we would do this activity with this waterfall in the chat where I would ask you to think about the 3 tools we've looked at, the administrator guides, the K12 bridging documents, and the COCOs on our K12 languages pages. And then I ask you to pick one of those tools and explain why you think it's most important for you to explore that tool more and or use it more when implementing our state standards, and specifically EN4, our focus about the teacher creating an environment focused on language performance and proficiency. Unfortunately, we don't have time for that today, but I encourage you to continue doing that and reflect on what it is you can use from the tools here in our state standards that are available to you for free, how you can use those to improve your own practice or think more deeply about your practice and maybe sharing that with others. Maybe you're a mentor to someone or you have a new teacher that you're trying to help become accustomed to our state standards and implement those effectively. So lots of things you could do with the tools. All right, we're going to close out. I will appreciate it if you stay on, but of course I know you may have to go. I will be quick. I would just want to make sure that you have other resources here and know what's coming up so that you can use that information for yourself professionally going forward. Wanted to let you know, of course, that we always have our NCDPI listservs for world languages. One of the things I do is make sure everyone here gets signed up on the World Language Instructors listserv. But of course, if you want to add others, you can always go to the listserv sign up, and I just put that in the chat box for you. And you can sign up for things like the World Language Education News, the listserv for DLI educators, the listserv for NC Linguafolio, plus many others. If you teach something else, for example, if you're duly certified like an ESL, there's one for ESL teachers and other teachers as well. Also, don't forget that this broadcast is part of the series. This is the conclusion of our first paired set of broadcasts, of course, because we have looked at EN4 now for part 1 and part 2. But you can always get these materials in the archives, and I will have them for you probably within about a week of our broadcast. They will be in the archive. I'm putting the link to the archives now in the chat box so you can go there and take a look. But they will be available for you and available for a period of time to complete asynchronously. If you have a colleague, for example, who wasn't able to join today and they want to go through this and complete it asynchronously, they can still earn a certificate of completion. Also, to let you know, our next part of the series is coming up quickly. It'll be in November and December, where we'll be focusing on LE3, the learning experience component of the TEL project. I just put a link in there also if you want to register for the November 3rd webinar. It's the next one coming up. But of course, you can also go to the archives and get those same registration links. So we'll be focusing on the learning experience component of TEL project, that domain now for several of our webinars, because we'll be looking at different sub-criteria, LE3, 4, and 5, as you can see. And then we wrap up our series by looking at performance and feedback, sub-criteria 1 on the TEL project. So keep that in mind as we move forward. Couple of things to note about our CEU certificates from today. I do appreciate you attending. You will get a certificate of attendance. Please note, as it says here, that public school units, meaning our districts and charter schools, must approve professional development offerings in all formats. So whether we do it virtually, synchronously, or asynchronously, blended or hybrid, or in person, you probably have to get approval from someone to count these, if you will, towards your renewal. But individuals who participate in the live broadcast of our World Language webinar can earn a certificate for license renewal. The contact hour or certificate will come in the form of an email with an attachment. So look for that certificate of attendance, approximately 1 week from today. Sometimes we get it turned in quickly. They turn it around much more quickly, but I would say give it about a week and it will come to you via email. And as I said, the archives will be available for a period of time and can be completed by individuals asynchronously to earn that certificate of completion. What we try to do is post the information in about a week, and then you have until a week following the next broadcast to complete a webinar asynchronously if you would like. That's it. I thank you for joining us today. As you can see on this screen, this is the NCDPI Languages team. It is comprised of myself, Anne-Marie Gunter, your World Languages Consultant, and I have a variety of ways you can get in touch with me there if you're interested. Also helping us is my supervisor, Stacy Daniel. You see a picture of her here. She's our section chief over not only world languages, but also ESL and English language arts. And finally, Teresa Parker is a critical member of the team because she is the person who will be sending you the email with your certificate of attendance. So look for an email from Teresa, like I said, in about a week or two with your certificate of attendance attached. That's all I have for today. I thank you so much for joining us. I hope you've learned something you can use about the TEL project and how it can help you implement our state standards.